Go. Good afternoon. Certainly like to welcome you folks that have braved the temperatures and have been here with us today. Thank goodness for light snow, not heavy snow. I said earlier it was kind of a trade out. Obviously, we were supposed to do this on June 6th, and we postponed it. So we traded off 5 inches of snow and 30-degree weather for 2 inches of snow and 15-degree weather. I'm not sure who won, but that's where we are today. So I do appreciate you attending. I think it is a time for us to follow through actually on the sermons that we heard this morning along what we're going to hear this afternoon, and understand that hope is in our community. But we need to understand it one step further. The hope is in us. And that's what you're going to have the great opportunity to see today. Because our guest speaker from Life's Choices does just that. And it's really impressive. When we first heard about her, it was like a breath of fresh air. And the first time, even though they've been in contact for 37 years, and they've been in the Kutztown area, but the reality of it is, I just met them last fall, or first contact, and really did not believe the amount of hope that they provide. And I don't want to steal her thunder. I'm just saying she's a prime example, and you'll get to meet her later on today, of what hope exists and why it's so important. Also like to clear up that I'm best known for religious liberties. Religious liberties is best known for the Sabbath and fighting for the Sabbath. But there's a lot more. And in this year, I intend to bring that forward in a series or a program calling it Community Awareness and Conscience. Because many people have lost hope. They need to hear that message. And there are people in our community, all around our community, who will speak up, will look for a return to morality, to value, to virtue. And it's key because we're in 2024. And you're already hearing the language on the street from the campaigns, and it's not good. It's not about our welfare. It's about their welfare. But I'm not going to go there. So anyhow, it's been an unusual fall for us because Deb and I sort of did a little pilgrimage. We've been to the Bible Museum in D.C. We were to the Ark, Noah's Ark, and we've been also to the Christian museum. And when it's visualized and brought from a book to a graphic or to a color or to a place, it's different. It's a totally different meaning. And I feel that one of the things I want to do this year is for us to try to forget that religious liberties is political, because it's not. And I'm going to read to you now from section 4. We actually have a local church religious liberties job description and manual. And it's kind of interesting what's in there. And it has more to do with community health, and our relationships within the community than it does with the Sabbath. We will never forget the Sabbath. It will be fought for throughout every year. But the reality of it is, there is that other side. And that other side is community. The biblical principles. God asks his church to not only be a people of sharing a common purpose and fellowship, but also within the community it serves to worship God's and to God, worship to God according to conscience, and to share Christ's love and its cherished freedoms. And we know all of those are on a scale right now, and the scale's leaning down, not up. One of the things I want to do this year, and what I'm proposing to do at the next board meeting, we've been asked to turn in a calendar of events. And you're going to be hearing from me either through email or maybe voicemail, not necessarily voicemail, but maybe virtual, that type of programming about community awareness is going to be our program and our conscience. And it's going to, not going to go into it all here, but we will go into it in details as soon as but we are going to provide a way for us to communicate with our local community, for them to be able to communicate with us, and how that we can support the community without interference, but with a gain to our Christian faith. And many, many of these organizations look that way. I'll say once again, it's been an unusual year for us visiting these places. But Thursday evening, I was at one of my meetings of one of the organizations that I belong to, and like what Life's Choices have adapted and have connected and affiliated with other groups, this group is called Free. And basically here in Berks County, it's, I'm going to say, a young lady of about 25 years old and some co-sponsors. And the word is no longer trafficking. It is truly slavery. And back in 1850s, 60s, in this country, we thought we set that all aside. But even though it may not have, or we may not think that it has a direct effect on us, that effect is proven to me from her presentation that we need to attend to this. Because basically, they're saying it's affecting our children. And these children are held to a standard unbelievable. And the average age is starting at 12 years old. Her purpose is to give alternatives to children, particularly those that are hopeless. And through the program that I'm talking about, I'm hoping to bring more organizations in from the community, make us aware of them. We have a lot of expertise, education, and the mentality and the faith in Christ to support them both financially, maybe, but particularly as people that are willing to go out and address that community and find out what we can do in the world to make our community better. And that's the only thing Christ has asked us to do. Why we are here, we are not to be of the earth, we are to be in the world, walking in the world, and he promises to walk with us. And with that strength, we should come out on top. We should be the winner. So I just wanted to make it clear to everyone that as much as I believe in preserving the Sabbath, I believe that we should consider what role we can play in preserving God's law in our community. Now, with that, I'm going to announce Dr. Kermit. I know a great number of you know him, have known him for quite some time. I've only been in the Adventist religion for about 2 years, and when I read his bio, I thought, oh, I didn't know that, so I'm going to read them all to you. First of all, the Adventist Church for more than 50 years. He worked for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Fully retired in 2020, he served as a pastor, a church administrator, a college professor, a book center manager. Among roles, he has a PhD in mass communications law from the University of Minnesota, dissertation on cameras in the courtroom. Phil in the Supreme Court Law Library, his documents or position was stated and kept in the library. He has published and spoken First Amendment issues and for more than 40 years. So I welcome Pastor Kermit to come up and give us his thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here today. Glad to be with you. I want to share some ideas today based out of Revelation chapter 12 and 13 and what it means for the future and what perhaps we can learn from the past as well. I'm working today, and John, thank you for this opportunity. It's one of my first times to blend the First Amendment scholarship I've done and the pastoral work I've done. So I'd like to look at that. Now, however, I want to start with a story about a dinner invitation. I received a dinner invitation in 1989 that I still remember. The dinner invitation came from Pastor Tsai Bu-shou, and it was to go to his house for dinner in Shanghai, China. My first wife and I had led tours to China for 4 years and had become friends with Pastor Tsai in Shanghai. And he invited us to his house for dinner on this occasion. Now, when I say dinner, I mean dinner. 14-course meal at Pastor Tsai's house. You have heard of Chinese banquets. You have heard of the Chinese ceremonial events where they bring in a lot of courses of food. We had a 14-course dinner at Pastor Tsai's house. I learned more about Pastor Tsai. Pastor Tsai was in his 80s at the time, and this is the 1980s. I wasn't in my 80s at that point. And Pastor Tsai had been a pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist Church's mission work in China. He was a native Chinese working in the Adventist Church in China before Mao Zedong came to China. He was a pastor and, in fact, church official in the late 1940s when the communist government took over China. He had a unique perspective to share with me about what a totalitarian government can mean. Pastor Tsai was the executive secretary of the East China Union of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The compound there in Shanghai had a beautiful 3-story office complex, like an old house building. And next door to it was a large church, seated 400 or 500 people. Bigger, well, may have seated 300, but bigger than our church here where we're meeting today. When the communist government took over, religion was outlawed. And to help Pastor Tsai know that religion was no longer useful, that his work as an Adventist pastor was over, they gave him a place to live, the Chinese Communist government did. It was on the 3rd floor of the office building he used to inhabit as the secretary of the mission. He still was occupying that same apartment on the 3rd floor. When I had dinner with him, he was in his 80s. He had to carry everything up 3 flights. Oh, and maybe I should mention the kitchen was not on the 3rd floor. The kitchen was on the first floor. So 14 courses came from the first floor to the third floor. Maybe I should also mention the bathroom was not on the third floor. Now, the good news is the bathroom was on the second floor. But Pastor Cy was in his 80s. His wife also. Their apartment complex was the attic of the old office building. They had 2 rooms. One was a bedroom. One was a combination living room, dining room, sitting room, study, and anything else you wanted to do besides sleep. The sitting room had a wonderful little alcove where you could sit and look out the window at the church. That church was now a garment factory. They gutted the interior of the church. And to help Pastor Cy know that his work as a religious leader, as a spiritual leader, as a pastor was over, they allowed him to work in the garment factory in the church while he lived in the church office complex on the third floor that no longer had any spiritual purpose whatsoever. I saw in his eyes a sadness I had not seen before. Then we began to talk about family. Pastor Cy had 2 children, and the Chinese government decided that they would be better off if they were not raised near Pastor Cy and his wife. So they were taken away to a school where nothing would be taught of God. Those children were also put on, they were both quite good athletes, one on a swim team and one on a tennis team. So they became traveling people for the Chinese government, meaning they were around their parents even less. And as Pastor Cy told me about his children who no longer had any connection to anything spiritual, let alone Christian, let alone God, I saw an even greater sadness in his eyes. When we left that evening, we had prayer together. We kept up a correspondence for quite a few years, even though I did not go back to China. But Pastor Cy passed away. I tell you that story for 2 reasons. First of all, there are places that are not nearly as accommodating to individual beliefs and liberties and life as we know here in America. I also tell you that story so that you might grasp how quickly things could change. Yes, it was from the 1940s to the 1980s, but in the first 5 to 10 years, all of his work as a pastor had been stripped away and his children had been taken away. I share that story so that as we look at these 2 chapters in Revelation, and as we look at what that might mean for the future, and as we look at what we can find in our past here in America, we might have a clearer picture that defense of our freedoms requires us now, not later, to be vigilant. Now, you've got some Bibles there. If you don't have a Bible with you, there is a Bible in front of you, right there where you're seated. I want you to pick it out because we're going to look in Scripture some for a few minutes and try to see what we can see. And I don't want us to get so bogged down in each word that we miss the sweep of these 2 chapters. So, Revelation 12 and Revelation 13. follow along with me. This happens to be the New King James Version that I have. The New King James Version is the version that's right there in front of you as well. In Revelation 12, the very first verse says, "Now a great sign appeared in heaven." The book of Revelation does not use the phrase great sign without it having great meaning. And so we look at this verse and we say, we are now looking at something significant. In the sweep of Revelation, the first 11 chapters have taken us through messages to the 7 churches, messages of the 7 scrolls, and messages of the 7 trumpets. We now come to a great sign that appears. And we find a great sign is a woman clothed with sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. So what we find as a great sign is a woman. Then if we look ahead at verse 3, "And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads." And so we have now 2 characters in the story that is unfolding in chapters 12 and 13. We have the woman and we have the dragon. And then in verse 5, "She bore a male child who was to rule the nations with a rod of iron." We add a 3rd character, a male child. And then in verse 7, we find another scene. We have now the characters set. We have the woman, we have the dragon, and we have the son. In verse 7, we kind of take a little side detour that's related. It's almost like you're looking at the scene from this angle, and then you turn and look at it from a different side. Verse 7, "War broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought." We now introduce a 4th character, Michael. We also introduce war in heaven. And just so that you can't miss what's going on, in verse 9, "So the dragon was cast out." That serpent of old, and just in case you don't catch the reference to Eden and the serpent, John goes on to write, called the devil and Satan. Just so you don't miss who the dragon is. And, it's not hard to understand the inference because Michael is used over and over again throughout Scripture as a representative of heaven and in fact, as Jesus. So we have the war in heaven between the devil and Jesus. Oh, yeah, and he was cast to the earth and his angels were cast out with him. So we find this sweep in Revelation 12. A woman gives birth to a son. The dragon fights with Michael. And then we move on. Now, verse 11, I need to give you verse 13, I'm sorry. "Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child." We are talking about the people of God being persecuted by the devil. Okay, then I want us to move on to verse 13. We have our characters set. The woman, the child, the dragon, Michael. We have the war that has gone on. We have the devil being cast out of heaven. And we have a devil that's working to persecute the followers of God. Then in chapter 13, we continue the story. John says in verse 1, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. And then we move ahead a few more verses. And I look in verse 4. Verse 4. So they worshiped the dragon, this beast that comes up out of the sea, worships the dragon. And then I move on ahead a little further because we find a second beast in chapter 13, down in verse 11. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. Now, we have a beast, and the dragon gives power to that beast. And then we have a second beast, and the second beast works with the first beast, who works with the dragon. And we have then let's look down and, let's say verse 15. No, let's look in verse 14 first. He deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Verse 15, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Those are some fairly frightful descriptions and mind you, as we look at interpretation of this, there's virtual unanimity that beasts represent government authorities. And we have a government authority here that's saying, if you don't do what I say, we're going to kill you. And then I want us to look down just a little further. No, I want us to come back to, I want us to look at that. That has where we are. Now, as a Seventh-day Adventist church, our traditional Adventist viewpoint has been that the woman in Revelation 12 represents the people of God, Christians. Our traditional Adventist viewpoint has been that the dragon represents Satan. That the beast from the sea at the beginning of Revelation 13 represents Rome, both in its pagan and papal iterations. It is the government of Rome. And that the beast that comes out of the earth in the latter part of Revelation 13 represents the United States. And that leads me then to a couple of thoughts. If our traditional viewpoint is, I'm talking now about the Seventh-day Adventist traditional viewpoint, is that the beast is the American government, and the American government, the book of Revelation tells us, is going to force people to do something, or you will be constrained, killed, then I'd like my government to be as benign as possible. I'd like my government not interfering in my life as much as possible. I would like my government granting me all the liberties that I can possibly have without infringing your liberties. I want to be free of as much government control as possible. Now, there are things I need to do that the government needs to do in order to make my life better. I'm very glad there were snowplows on the highways yesterday. I'm very glad there are highways. I think of the people who first came to Berks County and how they got around. Have you ever thought about that as you're traveling? You know, you get out on the Pennsylvania Turnpike in West New Jersey, and I think about George Washington being out in that area. How in the world did you get to Pittsburgh? I'm glad the government does some things for us. I just want them to keep my freedoms as much as possible. Now, I just want us to take a little look at some history in the United States as well. I spent a good chunk of my life studying the First Amendment, understanding the First Amendment, and learning the exercise of the First Amendment in America. The Bill of Rights, the First Amendment to the Constitution. It's the beginning of the Bill of Rights, says Congress shall make no law. And then it comes up with 5 things. We have the right to peaceably assemble as Americans. We have the right to free speech. We have the right to a free press. We have the right to free exercise of religion. And we have the right that Congress will not establish any religion. And that was an essential part. Dr. Leif is going to share with us a good bit more about the Bill of Rights. That was an essential part of the Constitution of the United States being passed. There were places that didn't want a strong central government if we didn't have those kinds of rights against a strong central government. But I want to share with you how that's been applied in the United States across the years as it comes to religious rights. The Bill of Rights says we have the right to the free exercise of religion. And the Bill of Rights says there will be no establishment of any church as the church. But the Bill of Rights didn't apply to states. So for the first 30 years, Connecticut had an official state church. They didn't change that until 1816. New Hampshire had an official church state until 1817. And in Massachusetts, the Congregational Church was the official church of the state of Massachusetts. No other church was allowed until 1833. Now, the cradle of Seventh-day Adventism is right over in there. And in 1833, the state of Massachusetts finally got around to saying, oh yeah, other churches are available. The Congregational Church received financial support from the state of Massachusetts, not until 1833, but still in the early parts of our country. And then I want to take us one place further. This is a bit of a tough one to grasp. The territory of Utah wanted to be a state in the United States. Now, you will remember, perhaps, how many of you are history buffs? I'm going to give you a quiz here. What religion might have been fairly dominant in the territory of Utah? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints settled Utah. They made Utah. The Church of Latter-day Saints was Utah. The Church of Latter-day Saints had a particular religious belief that didn't strike well with a lot of Americans. The word that most non-Mormons used was polygamy. The word that most members of the Church of Latter-day Saints used was plural marriage. And the government of the United States made it quite clear that statehood would not occur in Utah while the Mormon Church believed in polygamy. This is in a country that acknowledges you have the free exercise of your religion. I just want to make sure you put those two things together. In the 1860s, the territory of Utah applied for statehood. And those political campaigns in the 1860s, and we're enjoying one of those wonderful campaigns now, aren't we? Actually, this goes back into the 1850s. The political campaigns preached against the twin evils of slavery and polygamy. Did you know that about our country? The political parties said, you can't have slavery and you can't have polygamy. It's awful. And Utah didn't get its bid for statehood accepted in the 1860s. In 1870s, they applied because they wanted to be a state the same time as the centennial of the United States, 1876. Turned down. They met every requirement except polygamy. Now you may say, that's a weird belief. Their belief structure that they found in Scripture, don't ask me exactly where, I've never studied that much, said that you needed to populate America, or populate this world, and when you died, you went to another world and you became the savior of that world, and you needed to bring with you as many as you could, so polygamy was part of their official understanding and belief structure of the Bible. They got turned down in the 1870s. They got turned down twice in the 1880s. And the government of the U.S., somebody from the Department of State, I believe, met with some Church of Latter-day Saints leaders. And they had a little set to, and it was pretty clear to the Latter-day Saints leaders, no, it was plain straight out said, you'll never become a state until you don't believe in polygamy anymore. The territory of Utah appealed that kind of stuff to the United States Supreme Court. And in 1890, the Supreme Court of the United States voted 3 different cases to say that polygamy couldn't be accepted as a legitimate religious practice. And it became pretty clear to church leaders and state leaders, who were quite a bit the same, that they weren't going to get statehood, and they really wanted statehood. The president of the Mormon Church received a vision from the Lord that polygamy should be banned, and Utah became a state. Maybe you didn't know how thoroughly the state could influence the church. Lest you think that's ancient history, I do want to pick up on a little something else in our country's laws, Sunday laws. In the 1800s, laws forbade almost everything on Sunday, but they didn't tell you had to go to church. You just couldn't do anything else. You couldn't ride a horse. You couldn't fire a gun. You couldn't do all these things on Sunday. Most of those laws kind of faded, even though they didn't get repealed. But in 1961, the Supreme Court ruled that a Maryland law saying what you could and couldn't do on Sunday was okay. And in 2006, a Texas law was ruled by the Supreme Court that it didn't violate the First Amendment. Now, Dr. Leif's going to share a whole lot more than that with us about those things. I want us to come from the perspective of Revelation 12 and 13 that leads us to an understanding that there will be a government that tries to control us, and give us the perspective that we should be diligent in the protection of the liberties we enjoy, and perhaps be prudent in the ways we ask the government to control life in America.
It's always interesting. I think when you sit at a meeting, you typically learn something and something of value. And really, that's what community is all about, knowing our community. To be aware of what's going on, to measure it and make our own choices of what is acceptable and what's not. And if it is or isn't, how do I support or deny this? One of the things I heard last week, and I don't have all the details on it right now, but it's pretty interesting. 5 cases sometime in the next few weeks is going to be heard by the Supreme Court. And that's about the overreach of our federal government. That they're reaching in the states where they shouldn't be reaching. They're starting to dictate policies that should not be dictated. And that's part and parcel of the things that I would like to explore with our church and our community and find out how we might deal with that. Because it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out in the street. It means you got to write a letter from home, an appointed letter that tells your representative or your senator or your powers to be, whether they're either in office or not, because many powers come from outside the office, that you're not going to find this acceptable. So I just thought that was an interesting statement. I don't want to take away from Dr. Leif Christiansen's address, but it points out that as long as there's a court, and as long as there's people with conviction and are willing to put their convictions out there and on the line, we have hope. And again, that's what I hope this week, excuse the pun, but that's what I'm hoping is going to take place this year. But we all know, or for the most part, know Dr. Leif Christiansen. He serves as an elder. He is coming from the medical industry and has insights on that. He also works on the health ministry. He does Sabbath school and sanctuary class leader. He's been a lifelong Adventist, so he kind of knows all the traditions of the church, I would think, and all the scripture that ties it together. And I think it'll be a very meaningful presentation. I want to thank Pastor Netteburg for his input, because I know within the Adventist church, and when I say that, I'm talking about our whole church, not only this nation, but around the world, is all concerned with one thing today: our liberty and freedom to practice our faith. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Leif, or Leif, excuse me.
This computer is older, so I'm not sure it's going to last. I'll hook it up if it doesn't last. I'm going to talk about the Bill of Rights. Now, this is not a spiritual, biblical viewpoint when we just talk about the Bill of Rights, But when you look at it from a historical standpoint, then I think you're going to see that some pretty interesting things happened in our history and how the Bill of Rights came about. So, first of all, before I start, let me read to you something out of Exodus. And this is actually going to be Exodus 18. And it's going to be verses 17 to 23. And I bring this up because this is an interesting aspect of Moses, and he led the Israelites out of Egypt. And what type of government did Moses form? So let me just read this to you. So, and Moses is actually being now counseled by his father-in-law, and this is what Moses' father-in-law replied. What are you doing? What you're doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring the disputes to him. Teach them the decrees and laws and show them capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. So Moses was considered a great leader, and he still had to get advice for other people. Let's see if that works. And so what was it during this time period that Moses led the people with, and how did they become so successful? And if we were maybe in a class, a lawyer's class, and learned to be lawyers, maybe the assignment would be, let's build a government for Moses. And what would that government be? So let's see in terms of what they would come up with. So when the United States formed, we had a government that basically had said, we're not going to follow the British system anymore. We're not going to obey the king. We want to be liberated. We want to have our own government. And so we have the Declaration of Independence from July 4, 1776. All right, so, oh yeah. It may be nice to use the... I hope this can do it. Obviously, I don't have it. You don't need this in, do you? All right. So what I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about, how did the Bill of Rights come about? And how did we form this type of process in terms of starting our government? And so when you look at it, was the Constitution reformed before the Declaration of Independence? No. So how did we win this war, and how did we start a government? And as Pastor Netteburg talked about, there were Federalists and there were Anti-Federalists. And so the Federalists wanted to have a strong central government, and the Anti-Federalists did not want to have a strong federal government. And so it wasn't as easy as just a Declaration of Independence and then going from there in terms of saying, okay, all right, we started a government, here it is. And so there was quite a bit of battle that came from that. You going to the next one? And then the next one. All right. I don't know how well you can see it. It's probably Okay. So the Constitution was formed, and basically it replaced the Articles of Confederation. And when they formed the Constitution, they basically formed a three-part government. And this is the federal system. So the federal, not the state, the federal. So you had three systems that came about. You have a Supreme Court, you have a Congress, and you have an executive branch, the presidency. And those were the kind of the founding documents of the Constitution. But if that's it, then what happened? So we have this Bill of Rights, and they're called the amendments to the Constitution. And these are the types of things that formed. And there was a big battle over this in terms of what should be formed. So they had the Constitution, and they formed a government, but they really didn't have anything else to go by. So the Bill of Rights came about after the Constitution was formulated by many people. You have John Locke, Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, Thomas Hobbes, Montesquieu, and there were others. And they were basically added after the Constitution, and this is where the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists debated the Constitution and the need for amendments. Who's considered to be the founding father of the Constitution? Thanks. Madison. But what's interesting, and I'll say on the next slide, what's interesting is going to be what actually, you can see how they kind of formulated together. All right. What's interesting also is we're going to come about is this concept here that I wrote down, charters of power granted by liberty. How were your liberties in the European given in England and France and Germany back then? Correct. The power of liberty came from the power of the government. And if the government didn't want to give you the power of liberty, it didn't give it to you. Whereas in this case, they say our Constitution, the charters of power, are granted by our liberties. And that was a key component to it. In other words, they felt that liberty would continue to keep our government in an appropriate place. And so our charters of power are granted by the liberties, and you'll see this in the Bill of Rights. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so just a little history here. So in the last battle for the Revolution was at Yorktown. Have you ever been down there, down to Yorktown, seen the area? It's very interesting. So September 28, and it ended October the 19th, 1781. And that's a good 5 years after the Declaration of Independence. There must have been state governments, and I believe it was Ben Franklin that was over for the Treaty of Paris and helped sign it, and that was 1783. The Constitution was written in the summer of 1787, and again, James Madison is considered to be the author of that. It needed 9 states to be ratified. Look how long it took before 9 states ratified it. It took at least a year. And in that year time period, there was a lot of debates. In fact, 2 of the states would not ratify the Constitution until the Bill of Rights came around. But since 9 states finally ratified it, you could move forward with the Constitution. And what's interesting, George Washington presided over both the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And in that time period, when he became president, he was president from February 4, 1789. That's when the Bill of Rights really started to be debated in the United States. And it took a full 2 years, and not until December 15, 1791, was the completion of the Bill of Rights done. And James Madison, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, he had 19 amendments. 12 came to the states for ratification, and only 10 passed. I know we have one historian buff here. So, and yeah, there's just too much to learn for what I did, but it's actually very interesting to go back to it. And so when you look and see how this came about and through the historical aspects of this,
I think we can begin to put these into place and say, okay, what's interesting here? How did it come about? And what does it mean today? And as you've looked at chapter 12 and 13 in Revelation, how does this apply? So I'm going to talk about the Bill of Rights, but it's up for you really to take it from here and say, how is this going to be related to Revelation 12 and 13? How is this going to be related to last day events as we understand it? How is this going to be affected, and what role do I play since I belong in the United States? I'm a citizen of the United States. Go ahead to the next slide. So I'm going to have to step down to read this, okay? We're just going to go through the amendments, the first 10. These are the Bill of Rights in regards to that. And I'll try and summarize it for you as well. So I'm just going to read it. I know this is boring. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press, the right of the people peaceable to assemble and to petition the government for the redress of grievances. So what does that mean? We have the freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And we have a historian here who's really an expert in that, and we can maybe get into that later on as well. Let's go to Amendment 2, the next slide. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay? And that's the right to keep arms in order to maintain a well-regulated militia. If I'm correct, wasn't Utah, didn't they have more militia than the whole United States?
Not in the whole U.S., but they had more militia than any other state.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was another sticky.
Yeah. Okay, this is actually a big one these days because we've had so many shootings. Do you have the right to own an instrument that kills people? That's a big debate. According to yes, we do. Next slide. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. You can't quarter soldiers. That's what it is. Why is that in there? Any of you have an idea? Yeah, so this was for that time period. But think about it. If that wasn't in place, you might have a soldier or two in your house. Yeah. All right, next one. Next slide. The right of the people to secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath of affirmation, and particularly described in the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Anybody know where this came into play recently? Okay, what other things? I'm thinking of another one too. What happened in September 11? This is a big debate, as I understand it, September 11, because if we had been able to go into certain places, we may have been able to find what some people were doing. So this actually became an interesting aspect. Do we have the right to go into your computer, into your email? Do we have the right to go into other places? Maybe not search your house, but are there other places I could search? And there was, for a period of time, they were allowed to tap your phone without your consent. This is kind of just interesting. Amendment 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentation or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service of time of war, public danger, nor shall any person be subject to, for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of like liberty or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So that's basically the right to due process of law, freedom from self-incrimination, and avoidance of double jeopardy. Okay, next one. Amendment 6. In all criminal persecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district within the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. This is the right of an accused person, basically for a speedy trial. Next one. 7. In suits of common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, that's a lot of money back then, the right of the trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any other court of the United States, then according to the rules of the common law. And this is the right of actually a trial by jury in civil cases. Okay? Next one. Amendment 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fine imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. Why do you think that one's in there? What was going on at that time? Did you know that during the British War, you could just basically, the Britons could go into a pub, and all the men that were in the pub, just gang them up right into the ship, and they were in the British Navy. And if you were a foreigner, they didn't care. Off to the Navy you went. And they just basically did whatever they wanted to. Not that this is a case of really talking about a person that's in a crime in terms of that can't be excessive, but it's kind of interesting. Some of the other prevailing things was sometimes were forced to do things. And so some of these things are done for the whole sake of maintaining liberty. The government cannot come and impose upon you. And this is why the freedom of the United States has been really very good. Number 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. This is really kind of, I'm not sure where this applies, I'm not a lawyer, but basically this is the amendment that says there are other rights of the people. Yeah. Lastly, this is the last one in the Bill of Rights, number 10. The powers not delegated to the states by the Constitution or prohibited by the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And I think when you see this one, you have to remember that at the time there was the people who were the Federalists. They wanted a strong central government. And then there were the individuals who were not. They're the anti-Federalists. They wanted a strong state government. And so today we have issues in terms of state. What is a state law? What does the state regulate? And what does the federal government regulate? I'll give you something at least in the medical field. So in the medical field, I have a license to practice in the states that I obtain a license from. And the states are the ones responsible for directing health care. Now, we have Medicare, don't we? Is that a state program or a federal program? So it's a federal program. So now the federal has the opportunity to dig its fingers into a federal program, but how is it run? It's run by the state. So here you have a federal program that will probably have some mandates, but the states run it. So have you ever heard of state differences? You ever heard of how the state of Texas runs this versus the state of another one? And have you ever seen why some people, as they will elect to move to another state because they like the way the state runs their health program versus another state that runs it a little different? And this is a problem in the healthcare, particularly in Medicare, why there can be changes from state to state. So any of you who have moved and already experienced that, that's part of the issue. It comes to what is state controlled, what is federally controlled. So it kind of gives you an idea. So what do these 10 amendments really do for us? What was our understanding to them? Obviously, the First Amendment that we usually think of. So let's look at some types of things. What would you like the First Amendment to do for you for religion? Leave me alone. Okay? He alluded to that. I want the least amount of government to allow to do that. We have seen this with the pandemic, and a lot of the churches were very complaining about. They have the right to assemble, and they have the right for their religion. But what did some of the states tell the churches a few years ago? Close. Yeah. Okay. And the incentive was? Okay. But some of them didn't close. Some of them wanted to stay open, and they felt the right to it. So in this case, when the government comes in and says, look, if you gather together, you're going to get sick and you're going to die. We don't want you to do that, so we don't want you to gather. So they say, you can't gather together. And then there were other places that said, we're not going to do that. We have the right to assemble. We have a constitutional right. We're going to meet together, and we're going to do that. Is that fair? So here you have now a healthcare issue, and whether or not you believe some of these things or not is another interesting controversy, but let's say they were correct, and that not maintaining an assembly would actually prevent it. Is there any other history that is similar to the pandemic we just went through? The Spanish flu, back that way. Philadelphia decided to have a parade. And they said, we don't believe that, assembling together the Spanish flu will cause any problems. So they had a parade. And guess what happened? They had more flu in Philadelphia than other places because they assembled together. So there is historical findings in this case of a Spanish flu, the flu epidemic that came around, and that by doing something that said, hey, don't get together in large groups, it did produce an adverse effect. So does the government have the right to intervene and tell us what to do in those cases? Any lawyers here? Okay, yeah.
This is, I'm not sure where it's written, but it's one of those little hang-on notes that they put on every bill. And it says that the government can sort of void any of your freedoms to save from doing harm. Doesn't matter whether it's religion, school, place of work, that they have written that into a sideline to our Bill of Rights, that it is based, they have the right to act on great harm. And if anything is creating a harm, they can shut it down.
Yeah. So the whole purpose of, I think, this interesting part of the Bill of Rights is this is actually what gave us a great amount of freedom. Yet you saw a state that was denied its right to join the Union because of an issue of which they believed they had the right to have multiple marriages within their own religion. So at what point in time does the government have the right then to say what you believe you can't believe in? So it's kind of interesting. We have examples, right? Didn't he just give you one? And America was considered then at that point in time to be a pretty much Christian nation. And is polygamy allowed in the biblical term? No. Do you remember they wanted to get rid of "In God We Trust" on the dime? I forget when this was, but I think it's more in the early 1900s. And they thought, hey, for sake of just ease, and it's a very small coin, we'll get rid of "In God We Trust." Guess what happened when the people complained about it? And there was enough people that complained about it that they didn't take it off. If the same referendum came around today, I don't think it would have held. They would just get rid of it. So there are examples of things that have happened in the United States. And from a health standpoint, I think it's interesting. What point in time does a person mandate for your safety something to occur? Can I mandate that you get an influenza vaccine? We've already seen we've been mandated to get a COVID vaccine. Go ahead. Yeah. And you can be fined if you don't wear one. Okay? Can you drive a car without a driver's license? Well, you can. Yeah. I can give you an experience. I was leaving my home about 25, or my office 25 years ago, and right by my office is a traffic light. I was going to cross it. It turned green for me. I looked across the way, and it's an intersection where most people turn left, and so I just wanted to see if that car was going to turn left, because I was going to turn left, and we kind of both can then merge leftwards and pass. And he just mentioned me to come on forward, and so the light was green for me for more than 3, 4, 5 seconds at least. So I started going across the intersection, and bam! Oh, I got broadsided. Person didn't have a license, was not a United States citizen, fled the scene, and I was left with everything. That's an interesting aspect of experience in terms of what has happened here in the United States. And in terms of maybe some of you others have come across something very similar in regards to that. But why was that person here? Because it was better in this country than in their country. So when you look at these 10 amendments, and they're called the Bill of Rights, do you see a degree of freedom in here that enables you to be the country that we should be? And I'm not a lawyer, but as I've looked at this, I think it's interesting. It's not the power of the government that fuels this. It's the power of the amendments given to the people. Can these 10 Bill of Rights be abused? How would they be abused? All right. I'm an individual, and I believe I have the right to choose my gender at any time. So I'm going to start a gender-neutral religion. According to the First Amendment, I'm allowed to start a religion. I have the freedom and the right to exist, to assemble together. Okay. But haven't some of these freedoms been allowed because of our amendments, our Bill of Rights? Mm-hmm. So what liberties did they have at this time that protects it from becoming abusive? What type of liberties do I have to have for the Bill of Rights to be protected forever? I have to have some liberties myself, don't I? So if I don't have some of the same type of beliefs, honesty, truth, can't they be distorted? Yeah. And I'll bring up another one that I don't like right now. We do have the right of a freedom of the press. What if the press isn't truthful and honest? What if the press decides to skew the truth, and it's not the government that skews it, they decide themselves to skew the truth? Is that truly freedom of press? What?
Good or you can choose bad. That's the thing about freedom.
So the press has the right to choose what they want to do, too, don't they?
Well, and there's alternate press that you can go look at.
There is. So you can begin to see the gamut of things, and as you look at Revelation 12 and you look at Revelation 13, if you look at other end-time events, how do these things play a role in our understanding of our own government? How will our government change? And will it change? How many more amendments came after this? You know, I think we're up to 28. Yeah. Yeah.
Laws and the Constitution were established based on God-fearing, law-abiding citizenry. If you did not have that element, these laws would be of non-effect. They would not work.
John Adams said that our Constitution is only for a moral people. It is unable to govern any other kind of people except moral people.
Yeah. This is where that type of liberty that you have, okay, allows these things to be in play best. But if you don't, if you have a dishonest society, if you have things that aren't truthful, then these can obviously be skewed.
That's why people from other countries want so badly to come to the United States.
But you can see this is the amendments here in the Constitution. This is actually part of the Constitution. This is what has enabled this country to be so good. But what if we ruin that because of this dishonesty, the untruthfulness, and a variety of different things that can go into it? We can skew this to whatever we want to. Okay? And I think those are types of interesting.
Our current politicians say that they support our Constitution. There are two books. There's the original Constitution, and there's a book of 3,000 pages. And that has developed over the years. Every decision, every writing from the Supreme Court is attached to the Constitution in this 3,000 pages. So if the Supreme Court ruled and approved something not good, it's still there. If it is good, it's still there. The reality of it is you have to be careful of the words that people use because there are two constitutions in the United States right now.
The other big battle that we're going to live through in the next few years is the battle of abortion. And it was in the 70s when I was in high school that abortion was finally permitted, and it was reversed. And now the battle is actually going to be a state, and it's going to be a federal battle. And you can see already there are certain states that have already lined up and are more favorable to abortion regulations or rules, and other states are not. And so you're going to see quite a disparity in the future in terms of this component to it. So what right did the Supreme Court have when it changed that rule, and how will it affect the states? But you can see by the 10th Amendment, the states have the right to also do something different than the federal government. And this is where federalists, strong federal government versus strong state governments is going to play a role in. And we have that disparity. To some degree, I'm going to make a big, probably mistake here, but to some degree, the Civil War was not just over slavery, but it was also over the rights of the states and the rights of the federal government. Yeah. So, okay. So hopefully this has just been helpful to you. I learned a lot from this. And I think that if we understand these types of things, we can learn a lot more, and we can understand how these things came about. I think that's the interesting part to me, how this came about. All right, thank you.
The landlord locked his keys in the truck running.
It's interesting what we believe and what is, and that, oh
I'm sorry. Yeah, I got it. It's interesting when you hear different people speak and you think we have what we have. If you, in Ellen White's case, she believes that the Constitution of the United States should have been adopted as a Protestant doctrine. So it kind of lays out firmly that people of virtue were supposed to be running our country. That they were in truth, they were in faith, and most of all, they were always looking out for the benefit of the people of the country. One of our current church leaders, and I've stated this before, Orland Johnson in Religious Liberties, has a program on every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock. And they present facts about changing, just general good information. He works in the Religious Liberties Department. He was a official, I think he was a financial advisor or fundraiser for President Obama. And he was given a job after his success in office. He was a cherished member of the Democrat community, I'm sure, because of the fact that he had raised so much money. So he went to work, and he was in D.C. for a couple years under the Obama administration, and he left. And he is now the director of PREL, which is Public Relations and Religious Liberties in Columbia. And someone asked him, why did you leave? You basically had it made. You're a national figure, you had power, you had connections, you had everything you needed. And he said, when I searched my conscience, the only thing that was ever accomplished in the current Washington, D.C. area is re-election. And he had enough of it. And he left based on that one principle, because the interpretation is very simple. They do not have our interest at heart. And when we look at today's people, I'm asked a lot of, who do I vote for? It's up to you. There is no such thing as party anymore. There is your conscience. You need to know the people who are running, and you make your decision of what your action is going to be. If we followed back, and we fell back, I guess I should say, to what we were as a country, what we were as a government, and reinstated those strengths, that we wouldn't be talking like we are today. We would be in total praise of our government. The Madison put in the Constitution called something the Convention of States. And he did that the day or two before the Constitution was ratified, because he said, we've done an excellent job writing a Constitution to protect our government, but what rights have we given to our people? If our government is not right with us, what reprisal do they have? And the Convention of States would take an hour to talk about, so I won't do it here. But I will tell you that the important thing is to know what's on your mind. What would you like to hear? And how would you like to hear it? What's the best way? Because I'm open to discussions, and there's other people that are open to discussions, and there are other people that need our help to support action that will correct the evilness in our country, the black side of our country. And I always relate to it. When I was a kid, I always used to hear about who wags the dog. Does the tail wag the dog, or does the dog wag the tail? Real simple meaning. We're being wagged. as the dog, not as the tail. So I hope that we can understand that as Christians, and we heard even this morning from Dr. Ramirez, that the population of Protestants in the world is the greatest. And we should not be in a situation where we sit quietly and all it takes is a letter, a note. It doesn't take necessarily a militant action. It's about being civil, respectful, but saying, I don't approve. So I appreciate what both gentlemen have said today, and we need to find that way back to truth. And I find when I go out and meet different people, the truth is not at the top, it's at the middle, and that's us. So if you want to make a difference, you need to think about what your role might be. Now, on that, I'm going to break. It's 3:30. We have refreshments set up in the fireside room or the fellowship hall. And so if you'd like to take a break, wet your throat or take a little bit of food, we'd like to do that. We'll want to come back by 4 o'clock. And at that point, we'll turn it over to Joy Stutzman, and she will take and present life's choices. And if you don't take anything away from that message, which I think you'll take away tons of stuff, you're going to find that here's a group of people who are faithful, who are Christians, and saw a major issue that was already mentioned once and changed it. Offered an alternative to it, didn't necessarily change it. And it's great. So with that, I'm going to say, let's adjourn. We'll come back at 4 o'clock, and we'll go into the discussion, the presentation. But thank you very much. It is gratifying that you are here with us today. And I'm particularly humbled by the speakers because all three of them, I think, are more learned, more stronger in, can't say in faith, but stronger in knowledge, and they can teach us a lot. And that's what we need to do. We need to learn who we are. James Madison put in that Constitution of the States because he recognized the Constitution wasn't totally for us, that it was for our government. Thank you very much.